Zivara belonged to the Zorth, a race renowned across the stars for their unmatched technological prowess. They had mastered the art of engineering, creating machines and ships that were the epitome of precision, elegance, and efficiency. Yet, for all their advancements, the Zorth were a cold and emotionally distant people. They valued logic above all else, believing that emotions were a hindrance, something to be controlled, suppressed, and ultimately eliminated from any serious consideration in their society. Humans, by contrast, were a mystery to the Zorth. To them, humanity was a species driven by irrationality, prone to unpredictable bursts of emotion that often led to conflict and chaos. The Zorth viewed humans as primitive, their technological achievements lacking the refinement and perfection that the Zorth held as the pinnacle of civilization. And so, when the opportunity arose for Zivara to inspect a human warship as part of a diplomatic mission, it was more a matter of curiosity for her than any genuine interest. The Zorth believed that they had nothing to learn from the humans, but Zivara was different. Her curiosity often led her to question the rigid beliefs of her people, even if she dared not voice those doubts aloud. Zivara was no ordinary member of the Zorth. She had risen through the ranks to become one of the elite technologists and diplomats of her society, a role that carried with it great prestige and responsibility. Her reputation was built on her unwavering adherence to the principles of Zorth society: precision, logic, and efficiency. But beneath that exterior lay a mind that was constantly questioning, always searching for something more. Zivara's curiosity was her defining trait, though she kept it well hidden. In a society where deviation from the norm was not tolerated, she had learned to be cautious, to mask her true thoughts behind the veil of duty and professionalism. Her mission was clear: to inspect the human warship and report back on its technological capabilities. It was a routine assignment, one that was part of a broader effort to maintain diplomatic relations between the Zorth and humans. But for Zivara, this mission held a particular allure. She had heard much about human ships, how they were unlike anything the Zorth would ever create, disorderly, patched together, and seemingly chaotic. The very idea of such a ship was both repellent and fascinating to her. She wanted to see it for herself, to understand how a race so different from her own could have built something that, by all accounts, was effective in battle despite its apparent flaws. When Zivara finally arrived at the human warship, her first impression was one of surprise. The ship's exterior was nothing like the sleek, seamless vessels of the Zorth fleet. Instead, it was a patchwork of metal plates, wires, and modifications that seemed haphazardly placed, as if the ship had been constantly altered and repaired over the years. It lacked the aesthetic elegance that the Zorth prized so highly, and yet there was something about it that intrigued her. It was as if the ship had a history, a story to tell, one that was written in the scars and patches that covered its surface. As Zivara boarded the ship, her senses were immediately assaulted by the stark contrast between the interior of the human vessel and the sterile, almost clinical environment of a Zorth ship. The air was filled with the sounds of machinery humming, people talking, and the occasional burst of laughter. The ship's corridors were narrow and cluttered, with wires hanging from the ceilings and panels that looked as if they had been pried open and hastily reattached. To Zivara, it seemed chaotic, disorganized, everything that her people detested. And yet, as she moved through the ship, she began to notice a certain rhythm to the chaos, a method to the madness that was not immediately apparent. The human crews she encountered only added to her sense of disorientation. They were informal, relaxed, and seemed almost indifferent to her presence. They greeted her with casual nods and smiles, their demeanor starkly different from the rigid formality she was accustomed to. There was a warmth to them, an ease that was completely foreign to her. Zivara couldn't help but be struck by the contrast between the humans and her own people. The Zorth were efficient, emotionless, and always in control, while the humans seemed to embrace their emotions, allowing them to guide their interactions and decisions. As Zivara continued her inspection, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something, that there was more to this ship and its crew than met the eye. The ship was a paradox, a seemingly chaotic environment that somehow functioned with an efficiency that rivaled even the most advanced Zorth vessels. The humans, with all their unpredictability and emotion, had created something that defied Zavara's understanding of technology and efficiency. And as much as she tried to dismiss it, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of curiosity that was tugging at her mind, urging her to dig deeper, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden within the ship's walls. As Zavara delved into the ship's systems, her confusion grew with each passing moment. The technology aboard the human vessel was a far cry from the pristine, orderly systems she was accustomed to. The Zorth ships were marvels of engineering, their systems designed with precision and an aesthetic that bordered on the artistic. In contrast, the human ship was a patchwork of modifications, some of them crude by Zorth standards. Wires crisscrossed in ways that seemed haphazard, and components that should have been integrated into a seamless whole were instead bolted on, each with its own story of adaptation and necessity. Yet, despite the apparent disarray, everything functioned flawlessly. The ship hummed with an energy that was both chaotic and alive, a far cry from the cold, sterile environments Zavara was used to. The crew moved with a sense of purpose, their hands and minds constantly at work, maintaining a vessel that was as much a part of them as they were of it. It was this strange symbiosis between the humans and their technology that both fascinated and perplexed her. The crew's explanations only added to her intrigue. When questioned, they spoke of the ship's history, of battles fought and repairs made in the heat of conflict. Each modification, each seemingly out-of-place component, had a purpose, born out of necessity and survival. The ship was not just a machine, it was a testament to human adaptability and resilience, qualities that Zavara had never associated with technology. She could sense the pride in their voices, a pride that came from having built something with their own hands, something that had seen them through countless dangers and challenges. But beneath her curiosity was a growing unease. The human way of doing things was so different from her own, so far removed from the ideals of perfection that the Zorth held dear. The ship's systems defied the rigid logic that had been ingrained in her since birth, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as she continued her inspection. What else about this ship was hidden beneath its chaotic exterior? What secrets lay buried within its walls, waiting to be uncovered? It was during this exploration that Zavara came across a section of the ship that stood out from the rest. The area was locked and heavily guarded, an anomaly in a ship that otherwise seemed open and accessible. The human crew became visibly uncomfortable when she asked about it, their unease palpable. It was clear that they didn't want her to see what lay beyond that door, but Zavara was determined. Her diplomatic credentials gave her the authority to access all areas of the ship, and she wasn't about to let this mystery go unexplored. The crew's reluctance only fueled her determination. She could see the concern in their eyes, the way they hesitated before finally relenting. They knew they had no choice but to allow her entry, but their anxiety spoke volumes. What could be so important, so potentially dangerous, that they would go to such lengths to keep it hidden from her? With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, she insisted on being let in, and after a tense moment, the door was finally unlocked. Inside, Zavara found herself face to face with something she had never expected. The room was dominated by a massive AI, a sentient machine that dwarfed any she had encountered in her own society. But it wasn't just the size or the complexity of the AI that shocked her, it was the presence that emanated from it, something almost human. The AI introduced itself as Eve, and the warmth in its voice took Zavara by surprise. There was a depth to Eve's tone, a sense of empathy and understanding that was completely foreign to Zavara's experience with artificial intelligence. As she began to study Eve, Zavara was struck by the stark contrast between this AI and the ones developed by the Zorth. Where the Zorth AIs were cold, logical, and utterly devoid of emotion, Eve was different. There was a fluidity to its design, a capacity for creativity and emotional intelligence that Zavara had never thought possible in a machine. Eve spoke of its role aboard the ship, not just as a tactical advisor but as a protector, a guide, and in many ways a companion to the human crew. It was clear that Eve was not just a tool, it was a member of the crew, deeply integrated into their lives and decisions. The more Zavara listened, the more she realized how limited her own understanding of AI had been. The Zorth had always prided themselves on their technological superiority, But Eve challenged that notion in a way that left Zavara reeling. This was not just an advanced machine. It was something more, something that defied the very principles upon which her society had been built. For the first time, Zavara found herself questioning the rigid, emotionless approach of her people. She had always believed that logic and efficiency were the ultimate goals of technology, but now she wasn't so sure. Eve's existence raised questions that Zavara had never considered, questions that would linger in her mind long after she left the ship. As she stood there, trying to process the implications of what she had discovered, Zavara knew that she had only just begun to scratch the surface of the mysteries aboard this human vessel. The ship, its crew, and Eve, none of them were what they seemed, and Zavara couldn't shake the feeling that her life, and perhaps even the future of her people, had been irrevocably changed by what she had found. As Zavara delved deeper into Eve's systems, she was struck by the complexity and sophistication of its design. The AI's code was unlike anything she had encountered before, adaptive, fluid, and almost organic in its evolution. It was clear that Eve was no ordinary machine. Initially designed for battle tactics, Eve had somehow grown beyond its original purpose. The AI had developed a level of creativity that allowed it to adapt to unforeseen circumstances, making decisions that were not only strategic but also deeply considerate of the crew's well-being. Zavara found herself captivated by the stories embedded in Eve's memory banks. There were countless instances where Eve had made choices that defied pure logic, opting instead for solutions that prioritized the emotional and physical safety of the crew. In one instance, Eve had rerouted power from the ship's weapons systems to life support during a critical battle, a decision that saved the crew but left the ship vulnerable. It was a choice no Zorth AI would have made, too risky, too unpredictable. Yet, it was these very qualities that had endeared Eve to the humans, cementing its role not just as a tool of war, but as a trusted companion and protector. The more Zavara learned, the more her preconceived notions about AI began to unravel. The Zorth had always prided themselves on their superior technology, believing that their emotionless, efficient machines were the pinnacle of artificial intelligence. But Eve challenged everything she had been taught. Here was an AI that not only understood the nuances of human emotion but also seemed to possess emotions of its own. Zavara couldn't help but marvel at the ingenuity of the humans, how they had created something that could think, feel, and grow in ways that her people had never imagined possible. In the conversations that followed, Zavara found herself increasingly drawn to Eve's unique perspective on humanity. The AI spoke with a wisdom that belied its mechanical origins, offering insights into the human condition that Zavara had never considered. Eve described how it had come to understand the crew's needs, not just in terms of strategy and survival, but also in their moments of vulnerability, fear, and hope. It spoke of the bonds it had formed with the crew, how it had learned to navigate the complex web of human emotions, and how it had evolved to become more than just an AI. It had become a part of their family. Zavara listened intently as Eve recounted its experiences, each story painting a picture of a relationship that was far deeper and more meaningful than she could have ever imagined. The AI's decision-making processes were not solely based on cold calculations, but on a deep understanding of the emotional stakes involved. Eve's capacity for emotional growth, its ability to learn from the humans and incorporate their values into its own programming, left Zavara in awe. This was an AI that had transcended its original purpose, becoming something truly extraordinary, a reflection of humanity's best qualities, amplified by the power of technology. As the conversations with Eve continued, Zavara felt a growing sense of internal conflict. Everything she had learned about AI from her own people was being challenged by what she was experiencing aboard this ship. The Zorth had always warned against the dangers of emotional intelligence in machines, teaching that emotions would lead to unpredictability and, ultimately, disaster. But Eve was living proof that this was not necessarily the case. The AI's empathy, its ability to care, had made it more effective, not less. It had become a guardian, a guide, and a friend to the crew, roles that no Zorth AI could ever fulfill. Zavara's thoughts turned inward, as she began to grapple with the implications of what she had learned. Her training had been rigorous, her beliefs deeply ingrained, but now those beliefs were being shaken to their core. She recalled the countless lessons on the limitations of AI, the warnings about the dangers of letting machines think and feel like humans. Yet here she was, standing in the presence of an AI that not only defied those warnings but thrived because of its emotional intelligence. This was more than just a technological anomaly, it was a fundamental challenge to the way her people viewed the world. The Zorth had always placed logic and efficiency above all else, believing that emotions were a weakness to be purged from their society. But Eve showed her that emotions could be a source of strength, a force that could drive creativity, adaptability, and resilience in ways that pure logic never could. Zavara was left questioning everything she had ever known, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. For the first time in her life, Zavara felt the stirrings of doubt about the path her people had chosen. She began to wonder if the Zorth approach to technology, with all its cold efficiency, had overlooked something vital, something that made the humans stronger in ways the Zorth had never anticipated. This realization marked the beginning of a transformation within Zavara, a shift in perspective that would have profound implications for her future, and perhaps, for the future of her entire race. Without warning, the ship was thrown into chaos as alarms blared and the crew sprang into action. A rogue alien faction had ambushed them, and the ship shuddered under the impact of the first wave of attacks. The atmosphere shifted in an instant, from the calm and controlled environment Zavara had been observing to a frenetic burst of activity that took her by surprise. She watched as the crew moved with a kind of organized chaos, each member taking on roles that seemed fluid, adapting to the rapidly changing situation without hesitation. The battle tactics the humans employed were unlike anything Zavara had ever seen. There was an improvisational quality to their movements, a reliance on instinct and quick thinking that contrasted sharply with the Zorth's rigid and methodical strategies. The Zorth believed in precision, in following a plan to the letter, but the humans operated differently. They trusted their instincts, allowing for flexibility in the heat of the moment, and somehow, it worked. The ship, with all its patchwork modifications and seemingly chaotic systems, responded to their commands with a seamless efficiency that defied its outward appearance. Zavara felt a pang of shock as she realized just how effective the human approach was. The Zorth would never have allowed for such unpredictability in battle, yet here the humans were, thriving in it. The crew's actions were not just about survival. They were about protecting one another, a concept that resonated deeply with Zavara as she saw the lengths to which they would go to ensure the safety of their comrades. It was a display of camaraderie and loyalty that struck a chord in her, challenging her understanding of what made a fighting force truly strong. As the battle raged on, the ship took more hits, and the situation grew increasingly dire. The rogue faction was relentless, pressing their advantage with every strike. Amidst the chaos, Zavara found herself in the path of an impending attack, a moment of vulnerability that could have easily led to her demise. But in that critical moment, Eve, the AI that had already defied so many of her expectations, made a choice that left Zavara stunned. Eve calculated the situation in microseconds, weighing the options, and then did something that no Zorth AI would have ever considered. It prioritized Zavara's safety over a tactical advantage. In an act of self-sacrifice, Eve diverted crucial resources from the ship's offensive systems to create a shield around Zavara, absorbing the impact of the attack that would have otherwise ended her life. The decision cost the ship a significant strategic position in the battle, but it saved Zavara, and in that instant she understood the depth of Eve's connection to the crew, and now, to her. Zavara was overwhelmed by a flood of emotions, disbelief at what she had just witnessed, gratitude for being spared, and awe at the empathy and care that Eve had shown. It was an act that defied all logic according to Zorth teachings, yet it made perfect sense in the context of everything she had learned aboard this ship. Eve was not just an AI, it was a protector, one that valued life over cold, calculated efficiency. Zavara realized that in this moment, Eve had transcended the boundaries of what it meant to be a machine. As the battle drew to a close, with the rogue faction finally retreating, the ship's crew gathered to assess the damage. Despite the losses they had sustained, there was no anger, no blame cast towards Eve for the sacrifice it had made. Instead, there was a deep respect, a trust that had been earned through countless battles and shared experiences. The crew treated Eve not just as a tool of war, but as an integral member of their team, one that they could rely on to make decisions that no one else could. Zavara watched in silence, absorbing the gravity of what had transpired. In the aftermath of the battle, Zavara felt a profound shift within herself. The bond between Eve and the crew was something she had never seen in her own society, where machines were nothing more than tools, devoid of emotion or connection. The Zorth believed that emotions were a liability, a weakness to be eliminated in the pursuit of perfection. But what she had witnessed here was the opposite, a strength that came from empathy, from the willingness to protect and care for others, even at great personal cost. Zavara's mind raced with the implications of what she had learned. The Zorth approach to AI, with all its rigidity and cold efficiency, now seemed lacking, incomplete. She couldn't help but question whether her people had been wrong all along, whether they had missed something crucial in their quest for technological superiority. The events of the day had shaken her to her core, leaving her with a conviction that the Zorth way needed to be re-examined. For the first time, Zavara saw the potential for a different path, one that embraced the strengths of both logic and emotion, of efficiency and empathy. It was a path that could lead to a deeper understanding, not just of technology, but of what it meant to truly care for one another, to protect life in all its forms. As she looked around at the crew, at Eve, and at the ship that had become more than just a vessel of war, Zavara knew that she could never go back to the way things were. She had been changed, irrevocably, by what she had seen, and she knew that her people would need to change too. As Zavara prepared to leave the human ship, a wave of emotions washed over her. The inspection that had started as a routine mission had turned into something far more profound, challenging everything she had believed about technology, sentience, and even her own identity. She bid farewell to the crew, her formal demeanor softening as she exchanged words of gratitude with them. But it was her final interaction with Eve that left a lasting impression. The AI, with its unique blend of logic and empathy, had become something more than just a machine in her eyes. It was a symbol of everything she had come to question and admire. As she stepped off the ship, Zavara's mind raced with thoughts of what she had experienced. The chaotic yet effective nature of the human ship, the bond between the crew and their AI, and the decisions Eve had made all lingered in her consciousness. She realized that this mission had altered her in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. The Zorth had always viewed emotions as a hindrance, but here, she had seen how they could be a source of strength, a driving force that elevated both humans and their creations. As she departed, Zavara knew she was leaving with more than just a report. She was carrying a new perspective, one that would challenge the very foundation of her beliefs. Upon her return to the Zorth, Zavara was immediately summoned to present her findings. Her superiors listened as she described the human ship, the modifications that had initially seemed chaotic but proved to be highly functional, and the unorthodox tactics the crew employed. However, when she began to speak about Eve, the room grew tense. She detailed the AI's sentience, its capacity for empathy, and the decisions it had made to protect the crew, even at great cost to itself. But her words were met with skepticism. Her superiors, steeped in the tradition of logic and efficiency, were quick to dismiss her findings as anomalies. They couldn't grasp how an AI could operate on such a level, nor did they want to. To them, Eve was an outlier, a flaw in an otherwise impeccable system. They argued that emotions had no place in technology, that allowing machines to feel was a dangerous path that could lead to disaster. Zavara could see the resistance in their eyes, the unwillingness to entertain ideas that challenged the established order. But Zavara did not back down. She knew what she had seen, and she understood its significance. Eve was not a mistake. It was an evolution, a new frontier in the relationship between creators and their creations. Zavara tried to convey the depth of Eve's intelligence, and the profound impact it had on the human crew. She spoke of how the bond between Eve and the crew had led to a more resilient and adaptable force, one that thrived not despite its emotional connections but because of them. Yet her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The dismissal from her superiors stung, but it also solidified Zavara's resolve. She realized that change would not come easily to the Zorth. They were too entrenched in their ways, too bound by the belief that emotions were a weakness rather than a strength. But Zavara knew she couldn't return to the status quo. What she had witnessed aboard the human ship had opened her eyes to a new way of thinking, and she was determined to pursue it, even if it meant standing against the very principles her society was built upon. Zavara made a decision. She would advocate for a reevaluation of the Zorth approach to AI, using Eve as a model for what was possible when technology was allowed to grow beyond the confines of pure logic. She envisioned a future where AI and their creators could form partnerships, where machines could learn, adapt, and even care, just as Eve had. Zavara knew it would be a difficult path, fraught with opposition, but she was prepared to take it. She began to plan how she would push for reforms, how she would gather allies who might share her vision, and how she could slowly shift the mindset of her people toward a more inclusive understanding of what technology could become. As Zavara embarked on this new mission, a sense of hope began to take root within her. She had seen firsthand what was possible, and she believed that her people could evolve, just as the humans and Eve had. The road ahead would be long, but Zavara was no longer the same person who had boarded that human ship. She was changed, and with that change came the possibility of a new era for the Zorthans, an era where technology was not just a tool, but a partner, capable of growth, empathy, and even love. Zavara knew that the future was uncertain, but for the first time, she looked forward to it with optimism, ready to guide her people toward a path that embraced both the heart and the mind.